The website didn't just slow down, it collapsed. Error pages, blank screens, fans posting screenshots of server failures like they were sharing game-winning highlights. And the product itself, a single flavor of sports drink, was completely gone before most people could even reach the checkout screen. That is what happened when Caitlin Clark dropped Rainberry. And before you file that away as a fun internet moment, a quirky little viral story about a basketball player and a bottle of Gatorade, you need to understand something. Because that's exactly how most of the coverage treated it, and that framing misses the entire point. What happened on that launch day wasn't a social media spike. It wasn't a fan frenzy that burned bright and disappeared. It was a data point. One very specific, very loud data point sitting inside a pattern that 4 of the most analytically sophisticated companies in American business had all been tracking, independently, separately, with no coordination, and all arriving at the exact same conclusion at the exact same moment. Nike, State Farm, Wilson Sporting Goods, Gatorade. 4 Fortune 500 companies, 4 separate long-term structural commitments, 2 years, 1 athlete. That kind of convergence doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't happen because someone has a lot of followers. It doesn't happen because a highlight clip went viral or because a fan base is loud on social media on a given Tuesday afternoon. What drives institutions that size to move that fast and that consistently in the same direction is the kind of retail and consumer data that these companies stake their next decade on. Hard numbers, purchase velocity, demographic crossover metrics, brand association studies, the kind of research that takes months to compile and costs more to commission than most people earn in a lifetime. And every single one of those companies ran their own version of that research, and every single one of them came out the other side writing a very large check. If you've been watching this story closely, you already sensed something historic was building. What we're going to do right now is connect every dot, fully, clearly, and at the level of depth that the mainstream coverage keeps refusing to go. Because the Gatorade server crash is just the most visible surface of something that runs much, much deeper. And once you see the full shape of it, you won't look at women's sports or sports marketing or the business of American athletics the same way again. Let's get into it. Start with the Gatorade deal itself, because the structure of it matters infinitely more than the headline number. $50 million is what gets reported. $50 million is what people screenshot and share and argue about in comment sections. But here's what that number obscures, and what the people doing the real analysis are actually focused on. Gatorade did not put Clark's name on an existing product. They didn't hand her a co-branded campaign or a limited seasonal colorway that would sit on shelves for 3 months and quietly disappear. They didn't ask her to film a commercial holding a bottle of something that was already being sold to someone else. They went back into their flavor archive, found a specific taste that Clark herself has said she loved growing up, and built an entirely new product around it. The color, the packaging, the visual identity, the entire commercial narrative of the product, built from scratch, built around her, and then released not as a limited run, not as a promotional item, but as a permanent stock-keeping unit. That last part is the part that matters most, and it's the part that almost no coverage ever explains properly. A permanent SKU means it has a permanent slot on retail shelves at major retailers across the country. It gets reordered based on how fast it moves. Retailers track its velocity against every other product in the same category. If it sells, the shelf space expands. If it doesn't, the shelf space shrinks, the reorders stop, and the product quietly gets discontinued. There is no company in the world more skilled at reading those signals than Gatorade, and when they make a product permanent rather than limited, they are making a statement about their long-term confidence in its commercial legs. The market answered the question of whether those legs existed within minutes of launch. For context on what that actually represents, think about the history of Gatorade's partnerships. This is a company that has been signing the biggest names in American sports for decades. Michael Jordan drank Gatorade in commercials that defined an era of sports marketing. LeBron James has been a Gatorade athlete. Serena Williams, Peyton Manning, Usain Bolt. The list of iconic athletes who have appeared on Gatorade campaigns reads like the Mount Rushmore of global sports culture. Across that entire history, spanning generations of athletes, across partnerships with some of the most recognized human beings on the planet, not one product launch ever overwhelmed their servers. Not one. Caitlin Clark's Rainberry did it before the initial surge had even peaked. But here's the detail that Gatorade's internal tracking revealed after the launch, and it's the detail that separates a viral moment from a genuine commercial signal. The purchase velocity wasn't coming exclusively from WNBA followers. It wasn't coming primarily from Clark's existing fan base, the people who already follow her on social media, who watch every game, who would buy anything with her name on it simply out of loyalty. Those people were there, obviously, but the data showed something far more significant than fan loyalty. The purchases were coming from general consumers, people whose entire purchase history had zero connection to basketball, people who had never bought a WNBA jersey, never streamed a WNBA game, had no prior demonstrated interest in Caitlin Clark as an athlete. They were picking up the bottle because the cultural moment had broken through into mainstream awareness at a level where it no longer required any prior engagement with the sport. That specific crossover, the ability to move consumers who are not already looking for you, is the single measurement that every major brand is chasing, that marketing teams spend careers trying to engineer, and that almost no athlete at any level in any sport actually delivers in a measurable, repeatable way. Clark delivered it at a level that crashed a Fortune 500 company's e-commerce infrastructure on launch day. And then she did it again and again, and that pattern, repeated across different product categories and different retail contexts, is what started pulling four entirely separate companies toward the same unavoidable conclusion. The Nike deal came first, and if you understand what it actually represents, everything that came after it starts making a different kind of sense. $28 million over 8 years. Those are the numbers most people know. But the number that deserves more attention is this. It is the largest footwear endorsement in WNBA history. Not just the largest right now, not just the largest for a rookie, the largest in the entire history of the league. Every WNBA player who has ever signed a shoe deal, going all the way back to the beginning, every negotiation, every contract, every partnership, Clark's Nike deal sits above all of them. And Nike didn't stop there. They put a signature shoe in development. Not a colorway, not a limited co-branded release where they take an existing silhouette, change the colors, put her name on the tongue, and call it a day. A signature shoe, a design built from the ground up around a specific athlete's identity, their story, their audience, their aesthetic. A product that carries their name not as a marketing flourish, but as the primary commercial identity of the shoe itself. As of early 2026, that shoe doesn't have a confirmed release date yet. The product doesn't exist in any form that a consumer can walk into a store and purchase, and analysts are already modeling sellout scenarios. They're already projecting that when it does drop, whatever the date, whatever the price point, whatever the colorway, it will sell out within minutes of release. Not because of optimism, not because of fan enthusiasm, because of the velocity of Clark's existing Nike merchandise, which has been moving at a pace that gives analysts a statistical basis for projecting how the signature shoe will perform before a single pair has been produced. Sit with that for a moment. Nike is investing significant resources, design teams, marketing infrastructure, brand storytelling, retail coordination into building anticipation and consumer excitement for a product that consumers cannot yet buy. The anticipation exists before the product does. The demand is being measured before there is anything to demand. In the history of women's sports marketing, that kind of pre-launch infrastructure investment simply has not existed at this scale.
Nike is treating Clark's signature shoe with the same category of commercial seriousness that they apply to their highest-profile men's basketball releases. That is not a small statement. Nike has built its entire business model around understanding exactly which athletes warrant that level of investment and which ones don't. They have decades of data on what drives sellouts, what creates sustained commercial interest, and what distinguishes a brief moment of cultural relevance from a long-term commercial asset. The decision to build a signature shoe and to build the marketing infrastructure around it before the shoe even exists is Nike saying in the clearest possible business language that they believe Clark's commercial ceiling is high enough to justify the risk.
And Nike is not a company that makes that kind of bet casually. Now here's where the story starts to get genuinely unusual, because the Nike deal could theoretically be explained away as one company making one aggressive bet on one athlete. Companies make bold moves sometimes. Markets reward risk-taking occasionally. One deal, even a record-breaking one, could still be an outlier. But then, Wilson happened. Wilson Sporting Goods has been manufacturing sports equipment for over a century. They make tennis rackets and footballs and basketballs and baseball gloves. They have worked with some of the most decorated athletes in the history of American sports. And they are extraordinarily, almost legendarily selective about one specific category of partnership, the signature product line. A signature line is different from a sponsorship. When Wilson sponsors an athlete, the athlete uses Wilson equipment. Their name might appear in ads, there might be a limited co-branded item, but the core Wilson product catalog remains unchanged. A signature line is something else entirely. It means Wilson takes their manufacturing resources, their design team, their retail relationships, and their brand equity and builds a permanent product line that carries an athlete's name as its primary commercial identity. That product line sits in the catalog. It gets marketed. It gets reordered. It either builds into a permanent piece of the Wilson brand or it quietly underperforms and fades. Wilson does not do that for very many people. The last time they made that specific category of commitment before Clark, the athlete was Michael Jordan. Not a recent star, not someone from the last decade, not someone who had been generating buzz in the last few years. Michael Jordan, the athlete whose commercial legacy is so singular that it literally redefined what it means to build a sports brand, whose Jordan brand became a multi-billion-dollar enterprise that outsells entire shoe companies, whose name on a product line 4 decades into his post-playing career still moves consumer spending in ways that most active athletes never achieve. Wilson looked at their criteria for a signature line, criteria they had apparently not felt were met by any athlete since Jordan, and concluded that Caitlin Clark met them. Not because anyone is making a direct comparison between their basketball careers or their places in the cultural history of the sport. The Wilson decision isn't about career statistics or championship rings or cultural iconography in that sense. It's about a very specific, very measurable kind of commercial question. Does this athlete's name on this product generate the kind of sustained consumer demand that justifies building an entire product line around them? Wilson answered that question the same way for Clark that they answered it for Jordan. That's the only meaningful way to read that decision. And then, State Farm answered it too. The State Farm partnership is the one that tells the most complete story about what Clark's data actually looks like from the inside of a major corporation's research department. State Farm has been in sports marketing for a long time. They have worked with Patrick Mahomes, one of the most commercially dominant athletes in the NFL. They partnered with Chris Paul across multiple campaigns that were critically well received and commercially successful. They had Aaron Rodgers representing them before his tenure became complicated by other factors. The list of athletes State Farm has worked with over the decades is long and consistently high profile. In all of that time, across all of those partnerships, across decades of sports marketing investment, State Farm had never once signed a female athlete. Let that sink in for a moment. Not a gap they filled randomly, not an oversight they corrected out of obligation, not a decision driven primarily by public relations considerations or external pressure. a threshold that, according to the evidence, they had deliberately never crossed because the consumer research had never, across all of those years and all of those potential partnerships, produced a result that made the business case unavoidable. Until Clark. They ran the surveys, they modeled the demographic overlap between Clark's audience and State Farm's existing and target customer base. They ran the brand association studies, the research that measures what emotions, what contexts, what kind of cultural meaning consumers attach to an athlete's name when they encounter it in a commercial setting. They built the financial model, they stress-tested the assumptions, they did everything that a company of that size does before making a significant marketing commitment.
And they came out the other side of all of that research, writing a check to a female athlete for the first time in their corporate history. Think about what that actually means. The question wasn't whether State Farm was willing to sign a female athlete in principle. The question was whether any female athlete had ever, across all of those years, produced consumer research results compelling enough to clear their internal threshold for investment. And the answer, until Clark, had consistently been no. Which means the Clark research didn't just clear the threshold, it apparently cleared it with enough margin to overcome whatever institutional inertia exists around crossing a category line that has never been crossed before. That specific combination, the research compelling enough, the margin sufficient enough, the result unambiguous enough to move a major corporation past a threshold it had held for decades, is the data point that every analyst who covers the intersection of sports and consumer marketing keeps returning to. Because it's not about the deal value, or the media coverage, or even the historical symbolism. It's about what a result like that implies about the underlying consumer data. And then the picture really comes into focus when you line up all four companies side by side. Nike, Wilson, State Farm, Gatorade. Four companies operating in completely different product categories: footwear, sporting goods, insurance, beverages. Four companies that conduct their own independent research, maintain their own internal analytics infrastructure, and make decisions based on their own proprietary data. Four companies with no coordination with each other, no shared research, no collaborative decision-making process. Four companies that each, separately, ran their own version of the analysis and arrived at the same conclusion every time. When four institutions of that sophistication, using four independent data sets, following four completely separate analytical processes, all converge on the same athlete in the same 2-year window, they are not responding to hype. They are not chasing a social media trend. They are positioning for the next decade. And they are all independently calculating that positioning around the same person. Now let's talk about the numbers themselves, because the financial picture that is assembled around Clark in her first 2 years in the league is unlike anything women's sports has ever produced, and the numbers deserve to be laid out clearly rather than buried in context. Her off-court earnings in her rookie season alone reached $11.1 million. No first-year WNBA player had ever come anywhere close to that figure. Not in the modern era, not before the modern era, not at any point in the history of the league. The number sits so far above anything that had previously been achieved by a rookie in the WNBA that it barely registers as part of the same conversation. Sportico ran the analysis and named her the highest-paid player in the entire league. Not the highest-paid rookie, the highest-paid player, period. And here's the part of that ranking that is genuinely remarkable. Her on-court salary is still on a rookie-scale contract, the standard WNBA rookie contract that every first-round draft pick receives, capped at a relatively modest figure compared to what established players earn. She is not earning the most money in the league because her team is paying her a landmark salary. She is earning the most money in the league because her endorsement portfolio is so substantial, so diversified, and so consistently lucrative that it places her above every other player in the league, regardless of how large their on-court contract is. The endorsement earnings don't just supplement her basketball salary, they dwarf it by an order of magnitude. The basketball contract is almost beside the point.
Then Forbes did their own calculation, their own weighting of sponsorship value and audience reach, and the critical metric of how much an athlete's influence actually converts into measurable economic behavior in the real world. Sales-driven, product moved, brand perception shifted. They ran that calculation across every female athlete on the planet and named Clark the most powerful female athlete on Earth. Not in the WNBA, not in basketball, not in American sports, on the planet. That designation is not a marketing superlative or a headline designed to generate clicks. It is a methodology-backed assessment of commercial impact, sponsorship value, and the degree to which an athlete's presence in a commercial context actually changes consumer behavior at scale. The brands voted, the data voted, and a Gatorade website crashed.
Here's the part of this story that the mainstream coverage keeps skipping over, and it's the part that actually sharpens everything above into its proper focus. Because while all of that institutional momentum was building around Clark, something very different was happening on the other side of the same commercial landscape. A counterpoint that, when you examine it carefully, doesn't just contrast with Clark's trajectory, it illuminates exactly why her commercial dominance is built on something real and structural, rather than something temporary and circumstantial. When Reebok announced their partnership with Angel Reese and launched her signature shoe, the rollout was loud and deliberate. The timing wasn't accidental. Clark's Nike deal had just been announced and was generating massive media coverage, and Reebok stepped directly into that conversation with their own announcement, positioning the Reese partnership as their stake in the ground, their declaration that the women's game had more than one commercially significant star, and that they had found her. The announcement generated significant media coverage. Reese was visible and confident. Reebok framed the whole thing as a meaningful moment for the brand, a signal of their renewed commitment to women's sports and their belief in Reese's commercial potential. It landed with the kind of narrative energy that shoe companies love, a compelling story, a charismatic athlete, a clear market positioning play. And then, the shoe actually hit shelves. Within months of the release, something that no brand ever wants to see began appearing at major retailers across the country. Persistent, structural discounting. Not a promotional markdown tied to a new colorway launch, not a strategic price reduction designed to introduce the shoe to a new consumer segment. The kind of discount pricing that appears at outlets like DSW when inventory is sitting on shelves and the retailer needs to recover floor space and recoup capital. In the footwear industry, that specific signal has one meaning. Everyone who works in the business understands it immediately, even if no one says it out loud in a press release. Demand did not meet supply. The consumer urgency that a signature shoe launch is designed to generate, the excitement, the must-have feeling, the sense that if you don't move fast, you're going to miss out, simply did not materialize in any form that showed up in the sales data. No wait lists, no sellout announcements, no fans posting screenshots of error pages on social media, no server crashes. The cultural moment that converts a product launch into a genuine commercial event did not arrive. Compare that directly to what's happening simultaneously with Clark's upcoming Nike shoe. As of early 2026, the shoe has no confirmed release date. Consumers cannot buy it. There is no product to stand in line for, no page to refresh, no cart to fill. And analysts are already modeling sellout scenarios. They're already using the velocity of Clark's existing Nike merchandise as a statistical basis for projecting how fast the signature shoe will move when it finally drops. The anticipation is being measured and quantified before the object of that anticipation even exists. Nike is actively engineering consumer excitement for a product that cannot be purchased. Reebok is discounting a product that can be. The marketing story that followed the Reese shoe's retail performance tells the rest. The promotional cadence that typically surrounds a signature athlete partnership, the regular social campaigns, the athlete appearances, the ongoing brand storytelling that keeps a product in cultural conversation over time, slowed dramatically. Social content became sparse. the kind of sustained narrative investment that major footwear brands maintain around their signature athletes, content that keeps reinforcing the connection between the athlete's story and the product's identity, largely went quiet. For a partnership that was announced as a significant strategic move, a declaration of commercial intent, the institutional enthusiasm evaporated with a speed that was noticeable to anyone tracking the coverage. The footwear industry has a term for what drives that kind of retreat, and it's one that doesn't show up in any sales report, but shows up very clearly in internal brand strategy conversations: association risk. The concept refers to what a brand's consumer research reveals about what emotions, what contexts, and what kind of cultural conversation surrounds a sponsored athlete's name when consumers encounter it. Major footwear companies have risk assessment teams whose professional function is to model those reputational patterns and project where they lead over a 3 to 5 year horizon. What those teams concluded in this case is reflected not in any public statement. Brands almost never make explicit public statements about these internal reassessments because doing so would be commercially counterproductive, but in where the marketing budget went next. The shoe got marked down. The campaigns went quiet. In the footwear business, that combination has only one translation, and everyone in the industry reads it the same way. Which brings us to the question at the center of all of this, the question that the commercial data is ultimately designed to answer, and the question that the contrast between Clark's trajectory and what's happening on the other side of the ledger makes impossible to avoid.
What does it actually mean for an athlete to have commercial power? Most people, when they think about sports marketing and athlete endorsements, think about visibility. They think about social media followings, about media coverage, about how often an athlete's name appears in headlines. And those things matter at a surface level. Brands do pay attention to them. They are inputs in the early stages of the analysis, but they are not what drives the kind of structural, multi-year, multi-company commitment that Clark has assembled. They are not what makes a Fortune 500 company crash its own servers, or what prompts a sporting goods company to reach back to the last athlete they gave a signature line to, a decision they made 4 decades ago, and conclude that a new player finally meets that standard. What drives that kind of commitment is something far more specific. It's what happens when a real consumer, not a fan, not a follower, not someone who has already decided they love the athlete, stands in a store aisle, opens a browser, or pulls out a credit card. That moment, replicated millions of times across thousands of different contexts and retail environments and demographic categories, is where the actual measurement gets made. That moment is where reputations either convert into genuine economic value or quietly reveal themselves as something that looks like power from the outside but doesn't actually move products off shelves. The ability to move consumers who are not already looking for you, that is the measurement. That is the threshold. And it is extraordinarily rare. Most athletes, even very successful ones, drive commercial interest primarily within their existing audience, people who already follow the sport, already follow the athlete, already have an established relationship with their brand. That audience can be large, and it can be loyal, and it can be commercially meaningful, but it is bounded. A brand that targets that audience is reaching people who are already reachable. It's efficient in a narrow way, but it doesn't expand the market. What Clark has been producing consistently across multiple product categories, across multiple retail environments for 2 consecutive years is the other thing, the crossover effect. The moment where a cultural presence becomes so broadly embedded that it starts moving people who have no pre-existing relationship with the athlete or the sport. People who buy Rainberry because they saw it and the moment registered as something worth participating in, not because they've been following Clark's career. People who will eventually buy the Nike shoe not because they are WNBA fans, but because the object itself has achieved the kind of cultural weight that makes owning it feel meaningful regardless of your relationship to basketball. That specific phenomenon is what separates a successful athlete endorsement from a generational commercial partnership. And it's what makes the 4-company convergence something other than coincidence. Nike didn't talk to Gatorade before making their decision. Gatorade didn't share data with State Farm. Wilson wasn't coordinating strategy with Nike.
4 companies operating independently, using their own research and their own analytical frameworks, kept arriving at the same finding. When an athlete produces that kind of consistent, cross-demographic, cross-category commercial signal, the market doesn't just notice it once, it keeps noticing it every time a new company runs the analysis, and it responds accordingly every single time. The convergence of 4 Fortune 500 companies around a single athlete in a 2-year window is, by any historical measure, an extraordinary commercial event. But the more you examine the underlying data, the retail velocity, the demographic crossover, the brand risk assessments, the consumer research that made State Farm cross a threshold they'd held for decades, the clearer it becomes that we are not watching the peak of something. We are watching something in the middle of its ascent. Clark's signature Nike shoe hasn't dropped yet. The full commercial impact of her Gatorade partnership hasn't had time to compound through multiple product cycles. Her Wilson line is still building its retail presence. State Farm is still in the early stages of building the campaign infrastructure around their partnership. Every major deal she has signed is still in its early chapters, and the numbers keep moving. The audience keeps expanding. The brand associations keep deepening. Each new product launch, each new retail moment, each new context in which her name converts general consumer attention into measurable purchasing behavior adds another data point to the dataset that the next company analyzing a potential partnership with her will examine. The real question at this point isn't whether Clark's commercial dominance is real or sustainable. That question has been answered loudly, repeatedly, and in the form of crashed servers and empty shelves, and a sporting goods company that decided she met a standard they hadn't applied since Michael Jordan. The question now, the one that the next chapter of this story is going to answer, is how high the ceiling actually goes. And here's what makes that question genuinely fascinating from an analytical standpoint. Nothing in the data so far suggests the ceiling has been found. Every metric that would indicate a plateau, decelerating brand interest, narrowing demographic reach, declining purchase velocity in existing product lines, is pointing in the opposite direction. The institutional interest is accelerating. The commercial footprint is expanding. The crossover effect, if anything, is becoming more pronounced rather than less. What we are watching, if the data continues to develop the way it has been developing, is the early construction of a commercial legacy that could reshape the financial architecture of women's sports for a generation. Not just by raising the ceiling for what WNBA players can earn or what brands will invest in women's basketball, though those things are already happening at a pace no one anticipated 2 years ago, but by demonstrating with hard numbers and crashed websites and signed contracts that the commercial gap between women's sports and the mainstream sports market is not a fixed structural reality. It is a threshold waiting for the right athlete to break through it. The threshold has been broken, the data is in, and the 4 most analytically sophisticated companies in American sports marketing have all read that data and reached the same conclusion independently. The market has spoken, and it isn't done speaking yet.